He wants to build what I'm calling Cop City Midwest. He calls it a community safety center. I call it Cop City Midwest.
And I did want to just take a moment to acknowledge that we've been joined by Mayor Frey. Welcome.
Precinct! No new 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 precinct!
This is the approval of acquisition of 2633 Minnehaha Avenue for a future community safety center, third police precinct facility project. There are 8 ayes and 5 nays.
That carries, and item 2.1 is adopted.
3.5 years after the 3rd Precinct was torched by community members during the George Floyd Uprising, the city of Minneapolis approved a contentious new site for a future precinct building. This comes despite clear opposition from nearly half of the elected city councilors and thousands of engaged residents. Throughout the year of 2023, Unicorn Riot heard from some of the oppositional voices to rebuilding the 3rd Precinct, including community organizers, a council member, and a former Minneapolis police officer. Knowing now where the precinct will be located, we look at the history of the 3rd Precinct, some of the events that got us here, and the community organized assemblies on public safety.
This precinct has been a scourge on this community and this town for decades.
You had an entire culture of policing that was rooted in white racial chauvinism, that was rooted in hostility, unchecked abuse, and misuse of power and authority against poor, black, brown, native, and white folks. Here in the 3rd Precinct, which is one of the most densely populated precincts in all of the city, is one of the most diverse precincts in all of the city.
Yeah, the 3rd Precinct polices over a third of the population of Minneapolis proper.
So there's this history that has not been thoroughly documented of how, indigenous people have been picked up by officers that were stationed there, tortured. There's unsolved murders of black and brown people, because we want to name the 3rd Precinct is also not only the station that serves the largest boundaries of different wards. I think it's about 5 wards that's serviced by the 3rd Precinct. But if you look demographically, and most immediately, it's servicing East Phillips, one of our largest indigenous neighborhoods, also one of the most diverse, has, a huge representation of East African residents, Latinx folks.
The 3rd Precinct was probably the most unaccounted for precinct as far as very violent and brutal police officers, very racist police officers who targeted specific community members. When the department knows that a cop has committed heinous brutality, even murder, they know those supervisors won't hold their cops accountable. So a lot of them were placed in the 3rd Precinct.
There was the city's emphasis on isolating, the 3rd Precinct to just May 2020. We need to move forward from that date. And community members, especially black and brown and indigenous folks, amplify the fact that has been a site of torture for decades. Some of the worst crop of MPD officers were stationed there. Literally, other precincts was oh, you kill people, oh, you're a sociopath? Yeah, you can't be here. We'll just send you over to the 3rd Precinct.
Because of their violence, because of their racist brutality, a lot of times those officers were very well respected. They took pride in the fact that they were violent. I was more afraid of them than any community member that I had ever met.
So even there's knowledge that there was tons of bullshit that was happening at that site, even amongst the officers, amongst city leadership, and nothing had happened. You also saw this very slimy partnership between the police department through the 3rd Precinct and many of our corporate businesses like Target, where Target would sponsor the city in providing funding towards surveillance technologies that they would then try out in their stores that would target mostly black and brown indigenous shoppers and customers. So that site has been, I think of it like Chicago style policing. That site should have been classified as a threat to humanity from the United Nations, like they did with the Chicago Police Department, where they said You have engaged in torture tactics. That's exactly what the 3rd Precinct history embodied for the city of Minneapolis.
Essentially, the city told us to make one of two choices about the restoration of the precinct building. Either let them invest millions of dollars into rebuilding the building that young people specifically in this precinct said we don't want, or let us move it up the road
And spend double the amount.
And put it closer to a Black immigrant community that the police already prey upon heavily. And those are your two options.
Now let's talk about
let's talk about our two options for you.
Yeah.
The city had a whole series of listening sessions and surveys and all this other stuff. And what came out of it is that thousands on thousands on thousands of people said, we don't want the 3rd Precinct back.
Yep, everybody made it clear. They don't want either choice. This was a whole unnecessary facade. Manufacture consent. Like, we're gonna engage the community, but structure in a way that gives an endorsement for what the fuck I wanted to do anyways. And people already have peep game. Folks call that out too, like, we already know this is manufactured consent that you're orchestrating. No. That also came across very loud and clear in all the public engagement sessions.
There were 5 sessions, if I remember correctly. I think Jawaba, you hit like 3. I believe I hit 4.
I went to the Roosevelt Community Engagement meeting. I went there because I wanted to hear them tell their stories. I didn't expect what I heard. It was very evident that there's still a lot of trauma within the community, not just since the murder of George Floyd, but decades before that. They told stories. I knew it was the truth because I recognized it. And their anger is still so fresh. Their trauma is still ongoing. And by far the majority of people that spoke do not want another 3rd precinct built anywhere. They made that very, very clear.
Over 1,000 people attended those series of conversations, and people were not here for it. They said, neither location. We know this is a false choice. You're asking us if we want to be punched in the face or punched in the stomach, and we don't want either. It was no, we can't continue on with a policing model that sees working class people and residents as insurgents. That is literally how we were treated in the events of, May 2020, that entire summer. But for Black people, brown people, and indigenous people, as the DOJ and the MDHR report show, we've been treated like insurgents and, the enemies for years. We've always been seen as targets and have been treated as such. And it's a test, essentially. This is what the Frey administration has been. It's been testing the will of working class people, our resolve to actually care for one another and to actually build a vision for a just and equitable city that embraces working class people from all walks of life. And this was a test to say, can we mobilize on white fear again like we did in 2021? No one has been really, like, oh, I gotta have the precinct back, but all of a sudden now they are. You don't get to just, like with George Floyd Square, push forward as if nothing has happened. That's been the mantra of the city, to whitewash the events of the uprising, to act as everything is fine, and just continue on with the status quo. People were just like, we also can't continue living under the police state that has shown itself so clearly. So we need something new. Councilmember Chavez brought forth a resolution that basically said we would take 3,000 Minnehaha off the table. So the old precinct, we're not even going to consider that anymore. That received unanimous support. And then Councilmember Chavez and Councilmember Koski brought forward a motion to finally fund the Truth and Reconciliation process. In 2020, Council had pledged to initiate it, but it basically just sat unfulfilled for 3 years. So I was very, proud that, my colleagues supported us in allocating funding to finally initiate something that our community members wanted. But then we see a switcheroo with Mayor Frey and his administration once again manufacturing urgency, and immediately says we need to make a decision. We learn Century Plaza is now an option. Mayor Frey does a press conference with our council president, Andrea Jenkins, announcing that they're going to do this new thing of co-locating the 3rd precinct with the first precinct, and they bring forward a motion to explore that. That has been something that my constituents have supported. I've also led on this of what does it look like with our police force in decrease, and as we're taking on this comprehensive work of growing our unarmed safety services, we need to think very differently of how we use our facility spaces to also support this other component of comprehensive safety work. And then staff came back and basically said, this is going to cost tens of millions of dollars. And it's only a temporary solution, mind you. We weren't even talking about having a permanent co-location. We were talking about 5 years. So my colleagues, found it to be fiscally irresponsible to proceed with that and then decided to not support that option. Again, now we're hearing more of that, like manufacturer urgency from Mayor Frey's office saying you need to make a decision, When honestly, we have been actually doing our due diligence from the start, and in response to a botched process that he led. He manufactured all of this, created a crisis that was not necessary. Also, all of a sudden, we hear Mayor Frey says, now we're going to do a community safety center. And folks were like, wait, what? Where did this come from? Are we trying to rebrand the third precinct right now? Like, what is this? Because building a multi-million-dollar facility for 99 officers alone doesn't sell well. Like, you need heated parking spaces for our officers and things of that nature. In the engagement series, staff would say we need to protect the fleet, the police officers' cars and things like that. So we have to have parking and all these things. And people are like, wait, what about my trauma? Again, that's the premise that we're starting from. And we're willing to just drop a blank check to just finance things that are, again, not grounded in houses supporting a comprehensive model of public safety, and not doing it in a symbolic way. How to not just slap community safety center on the third precinct and then just have them have a basketball court there and be like, we did it, community safety, because that is very much in the realm of the city. We love doing symbolic things and saying it's one thing and doing something else. What we're seeing right now is Mayor Frey in a desperate attempt to prove to his supporters and his corporate base and the pro-police faction that, they're still in control, and that the status quo will prevail.
There were so many other approaches that could have been taken.
And so many opportunities in what is now a very long time period.
Right.
And yet nothing happened.
Right. Nothing that was reparative. Although I don't think the damage that was done is repairable, but at least an effort could have been made. We can change how we respond to what city government as it stands now does, and we can reclaim our own sense of identity as we're the government of the city. I live in this mud. I didn't grow up here, but maybe you did. Either way, our kids gonna grow up here together, and the future that the people we've elected into office is given to our kids is not the one that we want. We're not gonna be able to use the vote to change that. We have to use our actions to change that.
Yeah.
We have to use our behaviors and the practices that we govern ourselves with to change that. And what we want to support through the work that we do at Confluence is people taking the authority to run their neighborhoods into their own hands. And whether the precinct was gonna get rebuilt or not, there's still a need for all of us outside of city politics to get together and practice using our own authority to make decisions for ourselves. The way that the city goes about engaging community in the decision-making process gives us more motivation to do the work that we're doing now, which is hosting people's movement assemblies. And basically the plan for the assemblies that we're hosting is we meet once a month with folks from around the neighborhood for about 2.5 hours. And we form different working groups to investigate different issues around security in our neighborhood or in our ward, the 9th Ward of Minneapolis. This assembly is about security in response to the city's dog and pony show about where they want us to put the third precinct again. either back where it got burned down or behind a mostly African immigrant masjid in the neighborhood.
We're attempting to create a public that can form shared habits. So this space that we'll keep returning to the second Saturday of every month into next year, we can see it as a thread. It's not the space where we come and get stuff done. It's the space outside of when we're getting stuff done that we can return to and say, hey, I've been working on this, or oh, I met this person and they're really interesting and have these skills and experiences. It's a form of reporting back, seeing one another, and then growing that public.
There are people who make decisions for us and about us without us and don't have to live with the consequences of those decisions. And the decisions that they make set us up to live with one another in ways that are not productive, are not generative, in ways that endanger us, in ways that endanger the young people that are coming through us or that we're responsible for, in ways that endangers the elders that brought us into this world and that we have to support. We feel really confident that the majority of those decisions can literally be changed by changing the ways that people have conversations with one another and by changing who shows up to the conversation. And one of the arguments that we're making with the work that we do is that you can get a higher quality of decision made if you let the people on the ground in the neighborhood who have to live with the decision make it. Because at the end of the day, the quality of decision making that you can do and engage in is dependent on the quality of the information and the relationships you got.
Yeah.
And we have better relationships with people in the neighborhoods than the city does. The city government has more information than we do. So there's not enough parity on either side for us to make quality decisions. And so we're kind of like, what if we just engage people in thinking and practice around cutting out the middleman so that you have full access to the information and so that you have a higher quality of relationship with the people that you actually live next to?
Yeah.
And what would that change about the way that the city operates? So what we're doing is practicing that at small scale, just where we live at. And the hope, of course, is that people replicate what we do. Take it to your neighborhood, take it to your precinct. And hopefully by the end of our work, there won't be no more precincts.
Yeah. It's about creating affinity groups from neighborhood to neighborhood, from city to city, from state to state, wherein similar tools can be used, but the culture and relationships on the ground get to play out based on what they know. So hopefully the more this stuff gets done, and not just by us, but by all of us, where this is just how you act in the neighborhood, the less we have to have conversations about crisis, and the more we can have conversations about creation and creativity, which is why one of the other essential parts of this process is this autonomous RFP that is parallel to the assemblies. Because we feel like without the space to experiment towards creative ends, without the ability to kind of get your hands dirty and imagine new worlds, you're stuck in that binary relationship, that notion of there needs to be a fight. And to only think within the vocabulary of competition and winning and losing and struggle limits our ability to create worlds that are full of joy and celebration. So the AFRP is there through a number of different tracks for us to see something tangible and then make something really incredible out of it in proximity to one another, through different lenses, through different people's experiences. That kind of radical imaginary is a vehicle for us to imagine different possibilities of ways of living with one another, of ways that things can get done.